To more breaking news tonight, an advisory committee of the U.S. Food and Drug Administration has voted to recommend Pfizer's COVID vaccine for children ages 5 to 11 under emergency use. The panel supports a dosage that's 1/3 of what's given to those over the age of 12 in 2 shots 3 weeks apart. Pfizer says its vaccine for children ages 5 to 11 is 90% effective against symptomatic COVID. Members of the FDA committee agreed the benefits of the vaccine for younger children appear to outweigh the risk, but they had some concerns, including whether states would now mandate the vaccine for children to go to school. After a few more steps, about 28 million children as young as 5 could get the vaccine as early as next week. Joining us now is Dr. Peter Hotez, co-director of the Center for Vaccine Development at Texas Children's Hospital, author of Preventing the Next Pandemic, Vaccine Diplomacy in a Time of Anti-Science, and CNN medical analyst Dr. Leana Wen, former Baltimore Health Commissioner and author of Lifelines, A Doctor's Journey in the Fight for Public Health. Dr. Hotez, the FDA advisor struggled with this recommendation today in part because the CDC presented evidence that many more children have COVID-19 antibodies than previously thought. I'm curious as to what you think. If a child between 5 and 11 years old has COVID antibodies, do you think they need both doses of Pfizer's vaccine?
Well, first of all, Anderson, it's very tough to know for certain if a child has previous COVID infection or not, and simply measuring antibodies is variable, and you don't know how durable that protection is. But here's what's most important to remember. We saw the devastation among pediatric populations this summer because of the Delta variant. We saw unprecedented numbers of children's hospital admissions, and for the first time since I can remember, pediatric intensive care units overwhelmed. So we saw this 5-fold increase over later in the summer among pediatric hospitalizations here in the South. 8,300 hospitalizations altogether for children, about half young children, 5 to 11, half with that multi-system inflammatory syndrome of childhood, which is very severe, 100 deaths between the ages of 5 to 11, and about 14% of the kids having long COVID symptoms lasting more than 15 months. Bottom line, we learned this summer that COVID-19 is a very bad actor in the children 5 to 11, and that's why we need it.
Dr. Wen, I mentioned another point of discussion today is mandates and whether an emergency use authorization for Pfizer's kids vaccine is going to lead to more mandates. Do you think that should happen, or should parents with kids between 5 and 11 be able to choose to get their child vaccinated or not?
I think it's way too early for us to be talking about mandates in this age group. So far, we have an important study, but the study by Pfizer is just over 2,000 kids. I think the right next step is to have the parents who really want to get their kids vaccinated to allow them to do that. There are lots of parents who are living in areas that are not requiring masks in schools, where their kids are being exposed to a lot of risk factors, and maybe their kids have underlying medical conditions, including asthma and obesity, that predispose them to severe outcomes from COVID-19 if they were to have it. So I think let those parents that are really eager to get their kids vaccinated to get vaccinated. Let's collect some more information. And then if we have more information, including about what it is that vaccines can replace, for example, can vaccines replace the need for masks in schools? Can vaccines help to prevent outbreaks and then stop the need for quarantining and having kids not be in school? Then maybe then we can have a conversation about mandates, but we're a long way off from that.
Dr. Hotez, I mean, the advisors also discussed myocarditis, which is an inflammation of the heart muscle, and a rare side effect of the Pfizer and Moderna vaccine. As a pediatrician, how concerned are you about myocarditis as a vaccine side effect in 5 to 11?
Well, it's something we're going to have to watch. So what the concern was in the 12 to 17-year-olds, we did see a bump in rates, but it's still an extremely rare event, between 4 and 10 per 100,000. So it's still extremely uncommon.
4 and 10 teenagers per 100,000 got an inflammation.
That's right. So it's an extremely rare event. I mean, we're talking about 1 in 10,000 on average, and so that's quite uncommon. And almost all of those did quite well and had spontaneous resolution, sometimes requiring hospitalization. So, but the key point to remember, Anderson, is that the rate of myocarditis and other cardiac sequelae from the virus, from COVID-19, is far higher, possibly as high as 450 per million. So not only that, we're also talking about other cardiovascular consequences, thrombotic events, strokes, So all of that has to be kept in mind as well. So myocarditis is still an extremely rare event. It is something that we're going to have to watch. And as Dr. Wen points out, this study, that the bridging study to move forward on the authorization, had only about 2,000 kids. So we're going to collect a lot more information, hopefully, in the coming months.
Dr. Wen, according to the American Academy of Pediatrics, almost 118,000 children tested positive for COVID last week. As much as the country moves into colder months, cold and flu season, how big of a difference will getting the younger population vaccinated, how much difference will that actually make?
I think it will make a difference in terms of where COVID-19 goes, because we could have 28 million more Americans who are now eligible to be vaccinated. But I think it'll make the biggest difference when it comes to the lives of parents and their children. Kids have missed out on so much. They've been pulled out of sports. They missed out on extracurricular activities. Maybe they stopped having sleepovers and going to indoor birthday parties. They can now resume many of these things once they're vaccinated. Also, we're coming into holiday season, and if we're able to get the vaccine authorized by the FDA, recommended by the CDC by next week, then kids could be fully vaccinated by the time that Christmas and New Year's and winter holidays come around. I think that will make a lot of difference. And for parents too, parents have been living with so much caution because of their kids, worried about travel, worried about occupational exposure. It will allow parents and their children to return to a large portion of their pre-pandemic normal.
Dr. Hotez, I want to change topics quickly to ask you about comments made by former Trump coronavirus coordinator Dr. Deborah Birx to a congressional subcommittee. When interviewed earlier this month about the former administration handling the virus, she said the 2020 campaign, quote, took people's time away from and distracted them away from the pandemic. Dr. Birx also said she believes that more than 130,000 American lives could have been saved if more mitigation measures had been put in effect. I mean, which is a pretty stunning statement, 130,000 needless deaths. I'm wondering what your reaction was to that.
Well, when I first heard it, my first thought was, what President Trump did in the White House, the West Wing, and the Oval Office did was far more than be distracted because of the campaign. They actively undermined COVID-19 efforts. They launched a horrific disinformation campaign in the spring and summer of 2020, claiming COVID was a hoax, nothing more than the flu, spectacularizing the benefits of hydroxychloroquine, saying that hospital admissions were just catch up in elective surgeries, and that was incredibly damaging and caused a lot of loss of life, discrediting masks. And then in parallel, what they did was they ultimately refused to launch a national program to control COVID-19. What they did instead was leave it to the states, and they never put the federal government out in front. And the consequences of that were the states didn't know how to do this. And so the loss of life was catastrophic and needless.
Dr. Peter Hotez, Dr. Leana Wen, thank you. I appreciate it.